Hello and welcome. As always, we'll give folks just a few minutes to join the Zoom if they're going to, and then we'll get started. I now call this meeting of the South Whitby School Board to order. This is a board workshop. We will begin with our land acknowledgement, for which I will turn to Director Jackson.
Thank you. This land upon which we live and work was once called Chacochi, and it's my understanding that this part of this island, South Whitby, was a home and is a home to Snohomish people who have lived here and tended this land and these waters for uncountable generations, and that this land was also culturally and personally significant to many of the tribes of this region, the Suquamish, the Stillaguamish, the many tribes of the Lushootseed language speakers, Lower Skagit, Swinomish, Snohomish, and currently tribes affiliated with the Tulalip tribes, which is a reservation on the mainland comprised of people from several cultural groups. And so as we acknowledge this Indigenous history and the Indigenous present of these communities still being with us on this land, I wanted to draw our attention to a couple of opportunities that have been offered up lately. There's a great group on Whidbey Island that I personally recommend learning from called Whidbey Native Connections. And in a recent newsletter, they shared 2 upcoming opportunities. You can find them in today's agenda, thanks to the assistance of Ms. McCarroll. One opportunity on Friday, October 11th from 12 to 2 on Zoom is an opportunity to learn about understanding the impacts of the United States Indian boarding schools. That is sponsored by Interfaith Network for Indigenous Communities. And on Monday, October 14th, from 3 to 3:30 p.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Whidbey Island in Freeland, a gathering to honor Indigenous Peoples Day, which is presented by the Snohomish Tribe of Indians. Neither of these is a school district sponsored offering, but personally, I just wanted to invite you to learn about and participate in these offerings from other groups in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Jackson, and thank you for sharing those opportunities to connect with other groups within the community. This is a board workshop, and as such, we invite and implore the community to join in conversation with us. If you are in person and have something you'd like to join in with on the topics on the agenda, in particular on the topic that we are discussing at the current time, please just raise your hand or get our attention. And wait until we get a mic to you, and we'll get a mic to you and you can join in. If you are on Zoom, please use the Q&A function and include your note your name and where you live, just Langley, Freeland, Clinton, Coupeville, whatever it might be, and then start typing what you'd like to say. Please type in complete thoughts, because it's entirely possible and in fact likely that we will have moved on from the topic you're commenting on by the time I get a chance to read your comment. So if it just says, I agree, that's going to be a little out of context and we won't know what you're agreeing with. But if it's, I agree with the speaker who was talking about this and thinks we need to do that, that's fantastic. So thank you very much. The first item on our agenda for discussion is the field surface at the middle high school. We had a community forum, thanks to some folks who have come back, who were here the first time. So that'll be the first item we discuss. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moshe, who has a brief presentation of her own.
So really, I've taken it from the presentation that we have seen twice now. And it was recorded, as you say, and it's on the website. So I wanted to call our attention to really what the board's conversation is. You sort of have 3 options. If we can do nothing and continue doing what we're doing, that would require that you go back to the community through a series of public meetings and say, we're not going to do what we put on our bond list of things to do. So it's an option, even though it's probably not a preferred one. or we redo it. And in redoing it, it's very clear that we're not going to just do the same thing we've always done. So we either are going, we have to make a choice. The board has to make a choice as to what you are going to do, whether it's a sand, topsoil, or turf. Both of those choices require that we do major underlayment. And that happens with either surface. So just to sort of put us in that position of it, it happens whichever way we go. So I wanted to talk to you about what the pros and cons are, because when we had our last meeting, that was the board's questions. Like, what are we talking about financially? What are the pros and cons? How much work is this one versus that one? So I'm starting with this sand-based natural grass. And I can tell that this is hard to read. So I'm going to go back. Sorry. So I'll just go through it with you. Essentially, if we go with this sand-based natural grass, we do all of the underlayment with the exception of what has to go directly under a turf field. And I'll explain that on the next slide. That would be approximately $610,000, give or take. Again, this is an estimate in today's dollars. And it would never be perfect. So we need to be very clear that this would be a field that would continue to require our time and attention, and it would never, to date, meet the requirements the WIAA has for postseason play. So we need to know that up front. It would require mowing 2 to 3 times a week, and I've given you the specifics of when that would be, but certainly April to October, 2 to 3 times a week, and then the other months fewer, but about 70 mows a year. Every time we mow, we have to paint because those lines go away. It definitely, just like turf, will have an impact on the environment because we're going to be laying 1,800 pounds of fertilizer every year. We're going to use 1 million gallons of water every year. And we'll never, we won't be able to use it, by the way, that first year. 375 pounds of seed. And Brooke and I were just joking that that's a lot of seed when you consider how teeny tiny a grass seed is. So that's a lot of bags of seed. We have to core it, drag it, pulverize it, top dress it, dethatch it. And because we have to rest the field and rotate the field, there'd likely be no PE use because we wouldn't want to stress the field during the day if we were going to be playing on it that evening. I get all of that from a variety of sources, but specifically I gave you this Wazoo study that was done some years ago. It basically hasn't changed over time. The other piece of this to remember is what we would need to do personnel-wise. Right now, we have 3 grounds people. They struggle to keep up. We're estimating that we would need someone devoted to this field at least half-time to manage it, plus the cost of all of the materials. And we've gotten a variety of estimates of what that might be, but it's pretty significant. Over time, what we are seeing is over the course of about 10 years, that would be about, and you're going to say I'm exaggerating, but over the course of 10 years, the estimate is about $900,000 of staff and materials time. So that's what it would take for, and I may sound biased because I am, so forgive me, but that's what it would take for a less than perfect field structure because it would continue to be a natural surface that gets used time and time again. If we were to move to turf, it's quite an expensive install. A turf field, not only does it require the same drainage as the other field, it requires a top layer of crushed stone and
8-inch rock and 2-inch rock, which is about $600,000 of that difference is just the weight and sheer volume of
Right.
rock we'd have to do to get the base of the soil. So in the initial install, that is the main driving
I
difference
mean,
between
that
the
is,
two.
it sort of takes your breath away, the difference between 610,000 and 1.3 million. But if we look at this, there's no delay. You put that in, once it's done, it's painted, doesn't have to rest, doesn't have to rotate, can be basically used 24/7. We'd be able to host postseason play. It would be consistent, it would always be painted, and very little, if any, day-to-day maintenance. So obviously, we wouldn't have to devote a grounds person to it. And I'm saying it, at most once a year, it has to be vacuumed. That's my term for it, but there's a machine that does it, that basically stirs it up and resettles it. And yes, we'd have to replace in 10 to 15 years, depending on use. And that's estimated in today's dollars between $600,000 and $800,000. We have gotten reassurance that recycling will happen in that time frame. It's pretty close to happening now, and it's happening in Europe. But again, it's not today, but it will happen in the future. So we obviously have more details if the board has more questions, but those were the answers that, or the questions that surfaced from our last meeting. And several of us have spent a lot of time studying it, but Paul and I really spent quite a bit of time with the architects and engineers today and talking to each other. One of the things that we have not gotten a handle on, despite trying, is 1 million gallons of water is a whole lot of water. And we have a well system, and we use water, and it's one system that's out on Max Welton Road. So we don't know exactly whether or not it would tolerate it, but we're looking into whether or not it would tolerate 1 million gallons more of use a year. So again, I leave that conversation now to the board and community. I just wanted to ground us in the two realities of the project.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moshe. Now we'll open it up to board and community comments and questions. I know that we've had concerns about environmental impacts there at the headwaters of the Max Welton River, which is a salmon-bearing stream. And I had a large number of concerns about that going into this project, but having asked questions about that, I've heard that they've removed the PFAS component to manufacture, which is what was getting PFAS into the water system. They've removed there were a few of these fields in the Northeast, I believe, that had lead come up, and they've removed that from manufacturing. There are infill things that are not the ground up tires that then don't get rubber into systems, things like cork. So just, there has been a lot of discussion about the environmental impacts of turf as well, because I know that's a major concern for the community. So I just want to open it up for discussion and note that the timing on this is we have this moment for this meeting for discussion. And then in 2 weeks, the board will take a vote on this as to which solution to go with. And at that point, the bond team can go ahead with whatever we decide.
Great, thank you. I was unable to participate in real time, but I was able to watch the recording and I found it very informative. Thank you. One of the things that I learned from the recording was that it's not just the infill and the surface, it's the infill and the pad and the surface. And so I was really grateful to know that there are some innovations in natural products for the infill that are, mold and mildew resistant and don't hold water the way some like coconut fiber might, but that are a safer alternative for the environment and for human health than perhaps an inorganic matter. So I really liked the idea of a cork infill, for instance. I know that we also have choices for pads between, for instance, foam and crumb rubber, and choices for turf, and some are less likely to break down and add microplastics to the environment. So I did really appreciate all that, and I too was swayed over the last few months with the discussion that I'm hearing and the research I've been doing on my own away from being convinced that natural grass is the greener solution really, I don't think that for a field that serves student athletes to the standards of their league, that there is a truly environmentally neutral option. We just can't have a natural field on natural topsoil that functions the way we need the surface to function. And much as putting a new roof on a 30,000 square foot educational space has an environmental impact, putting a new playing surface outside our school has an environmental impact. And the one kind of space for retaining biological function that I see around this project is thinking about how we manage stormwater. And even though the current grass field doesn't look like an ecosystem, it does harbor microbiota and, you know, earthworms and insects. And if you go out there and look, you'll probably see little critters. And I think that neither a heavily fertilized sand-based field nor this turf field would provide as much space for those other non-human beings as the current field does, which isn't to say it's some kind of pristine habitat. But I just think about, could we at least have like a biological stormwater maintenance site where we think about landscaping aquatic life that can help process that stormwater before it goes into our stream. And I also think about the educational opportunity about something like that for students who might be interested in a future in environmental engineering and landscape architecture.
So the one thing I learned about the water system that Dr. Moshe was mentioning under the field is it's held to a forest floor standard, in that anything going through it has to be as filtered as it would going through a natural forest floor, which made me happy, which doesn't get to the surface problem, but does get to the water problem.
Right. Yeah, I also heard that. Thank you. And I liked that we're being held to certain standards for retaining and slowing that water. I think there's something to be said for finding places for life on our campus, even when the legal threshold doesn't require biological activity. And I just think about, especially in this time of climate consequences, as we're watching what's happening in the American Southeast, the more we can do to prepare our students for a future where working with the processes of nature is part of the human experience. I just see an opportunity to raise innovators who think about the way a pond with natural plant life can participate in making human existence a little better for the planet.
Thank you so much for sharing that voice. And I really would like to pinpoint the other thing you said, besides with, you know, biodiversity and the ecology and all those things, which we haven't gotten to talk about in a public forum yet. So thank you for being that voice. I also want to call in the idea of having that field be as accessible for as many students as possible. Because we currently sit in a binary in public schools in America where fields for athletics and PE are a standard. And I learned a lot from the presentation last week. I didn't know anything about either kind of field because I've always sat outside of that sports, you know, sort of athletics on a field, you know, space. But I like the idea of having this field not only be physically safe for students, because that's tantamount, not only be pride of place for our student athletes, our students in general, our alumni, and our community. But I also would like to see that field be accessible to students who maybe who have been marginalized or harmed in the past through everything from not having access to sports because of financial reasons, not having access to sports because they are marginalized in another way, or not feeling comfortable or safe as part of a athletic or even a physical education space. And so I love the idea of finding ways we can include and engage students at all levels in this beautiful thing that you know, some in our community have said we are being forced to build because that is the cultural standard currently. And so I just really appreciate that thought of how can we involve as many students as possible and really create a sense of belonging around the field that is not entirely and 100% focused around athletic prowess. So thank you.
I was I was wondering, because at the bond meetings, being in that committee, we discussed cork versus tire rubber. Do all these statistics apply the same for both tire rubber and cork, or is there differences between them that we have to go?
They don't do tire rubber anymore. So really what we've been faced with, I say that like it's a bad thing. What they've been talking about is cork. You can do almonds, you can do all kinds of things, but the rubber is no longer the standard. There is the padding underneath that you spoke to that was this combination of rubber and pebbles. That's what it looked like to me. I don't know what you really call it, but that's kind of passé too. It's more of the foam that they've been talking about. And again, I'm not versed on what goes into that, but it's a product that is better for the environment, doesn't have the PFAS. Yeah, rubber is not it.
And I think I might be able to elaborate a little from things I've heard at conventions and from retailers and installers of these products. I've heard that there's still a range of choices around the products and that you can choose the product that's more environmentally friendly and more expensive, or less environmentally friendly and less expensive, for instance. But I think when one asks, which is the environmentally friendly choice or which is the affordable choice, one has to think about more than just the installation. So on the environmentally friendly question is, what are the pollutants and inputs of manufacture? What are the pollutants during the lifespan of the product, and how well can those be mitigated? And then what is the waste or recycling menu of choices going to look like in 10 to 15 years? And then there's also the question around what is the lifespan and durability of that product really? And for instance, if we choose the most green option, but it breaks down in 6 years instead of 12, and we have to double our replacement frequency, is that really the greenest choice? So one thing I appreciated hearing in the presentation recording was that the board will basically be allowed to learn enough to have a vote that includes setting some criteria. So saying, we do have an expectation that it'll have qualities like A, B, and C. And then within those criteria, it'll go out for bid to the professionals who actually know how to satisfy those needs with whatever products they specialize in. So I do think rubber is still a choice, but it's probably not a choice that we're being steered towards because of our values.
Yeah, it's not really used in the Pacific Northwest is what they're telling us. So yes, exactly that. We're being steered away to much more environmentally friendly products.
Yeah, and I've heard a little bit of pushback from students on the rubber turf in specific, just because it's harder to go on, I guess.
I have a question that actually arose for me when I was hearing you and reflect on, students for a variety of reasons may not have felt welcomed or represented on our sports fields. And that is, will there be a difference in access to the field for students with mobility aids if we choose natural grass versus turf?
It's actually, they all have to be ADA compliant. In terms of accessibility, it's more accessible as a turf field because it's a more level surface, and folks who may not ambulate by walking, for example, they use a wheelchair, will have easier access. It still will be surrounded by a track. And I do want to chime in because this came up as a question as well. It talks about accessibility. We met with the fire chief today and talked about a helipad and where we can locate it, and they actually prefer it not be located on the current football field or the new field because the lights actually are not a help, they're a distraction. So we actually found a spot that's adjacent to the parks that's still on school land that we've talked about putting macadam on and a nice big helipad landing and a windsock and making it an actual landing site, not an unofficial situation. So in terms of accessibility, that was another plus, that it actually provides a benefit, right? That whether it's turf or grass, it's immaterial, but because we don't want the helicopter on the field, the alternative is actually better for them as pilots. So that was a good thing.
In the current design of the field too, will lift it about 2 feet, which will make it level with where the student section is now. So there won't be a step down on the field. And then the raising of that field is to get the drainage system underneath it. So they're talking about getting rid of that initial step down to the field to begin with, which is removes a barrier to entry to the field.
Yeah, and that's for either the sand field or the turf. Yeah.
And will other requirements of WIAA to host postseason play be met through this improvement process if we make the decision to go with the turf field?
Yeah, yes. We can't do postseason play without a turf field on our site. We can't host it.
But in terms of the requirements like grandstand seating for visiting teams, are those other needs able to be met either through capital projects or bond funding?
Right now, our stands are fine. We do have to provide visitors with stands, and ours are big enough and large enough. The other thing too is if the board does approve field turf, we'll have a subcommittee, bond committee with our coaches and PE teachers and talk about the configuration of the track. There's some things that you have to do in order for you to host league and district championship meets. So that's another thing that we're talking about.
Great, thank you.
And we'll have to find a new place for javelin and shot put.
And actually, no, because they have special tips on them. So like Kings and a lot of schools, they still do it on their field. So that could be a cost savings actually in our first architect's rendering of the how it would look and lay out.
Cool. That's really cool. Thank you.
I just want to say, as a soccer player who uses this field on the daily, well, not anymore on the daily because we aren't able to practice on our home stadium field because of how bad and the conditions that the field are in now. So we have to like take the elementary school's space and use it on the daily. And our field we've had so many injuries these past couple years with players having torn ACLs, ankle injuries, hip injuries, everything like that. And there's such a lump in the field that we aren't able to properly pass the ball to players. And because of those bumps, the ball will go any direction that it wants to, not where it's intended to go. And we want to take pride in our school and having a field like this. When visiting schools come, we all feel embarrassed. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Just a moment.
Thank
Can
you.
you note your name for the record? Let's get that mic back real quick.
My name is Logan Schnobreck.
Thank you, Logan, for sharing that. It's always great to hear from the folks who actually use the field. So thank you.
I have a follow-up question based on Logan's comment. If we go with a sand-based natural grass field, will it also deteriorate into the current unsafe condition of the current field, or is the current condition based because of the topsoil-based field?
So it would deteriorate if we used it as we currently do. We'd have to rest it. We would have to have them using other fields. If you think about the Parks and Rec, they don't have turf. They have multiple fields. They rest and rotate their fields. And we can't even use their fields sometimes because they're resting and rotating. So the short answer is yes, it would deteriorate. And we'd have to wait a year to even use it because of the need for those root systems to take hold.
Got it. Okay. And so maybe a different question would be if we were to install the sand-based natural grass and take care of it properly by not allowing PE and doing all the resting and rotating, is there a place for PE to be and for the teams to play and practice when we're resting and rotating?
No,
Okay.
that's what we're dealing with now. what we just heard is we have to go down to the elementary school to practice soccer, which by, you infer that they don't use it during the day, or if they do, they're doing more damage, right? We see what'd we see? Fleet ball, using the field during a PE class. But again, that's wear and tear on the field. So, I mean, I've heard this since I got here from the Parks and Rec grass guru, Tom Fallon, that you're never going to have a field like you want to have a field because you have one, or, and the only reason the baseball field looks like the baseball field does, and now the softball field's starting to look like that, is because we don't use them nearly as much, and they're getting care and attention and irrigation. So again, it's obvious to me, as who I am, that if we were to do turf, we can use that field 24/7. We're getting new lights put on that field. The surface will be very consistent and easy to maintain. But that is not me taking into account all of the other factors you're talking about. That is me taking into account the logistics and the cost. As a school district, our mission is to educate and to give kids opportunities, and it makes perfect sense to me that this is what we'd want to do. We also live in a community and care about our environment and all of that, which is why I'm just the superintendent and the board makes the decision.
Yeah, it's my understanding that if we rested it properly,
Charlene Davenport, Clinton, Washington. And I sent an email to the board last week after the seminar that gave us a presentation. And at first I was going to go with the grass. By the end of the meeting, I was more and more convinced of the turf. So then I texted my youngest daughter, a South Woodby graduate in 1993, who is a certified sports medicine trainer, and served in that position at Beverly Hills High School for a number of years. She is now the athletic director at Santa Monica High School in California, with a total population of 2,200 plus students at the school. They put in a turf field, and she said it cut their maintenance in half. She also was more interested in it as far as studies that have been done on injuries. And she's looked at various studies, pro and con. And so she has a special interest. Being a trainer, she has a very great interest in injuries. And she said that so far, with 3 years, they have not had one injury on their field, turf field, and they use it all the time.
Thank you, Charlene, for sharing that. That was one of my initial concerns as well, especially considering I'm a football fan. And so I've been hearing a lot of talk about NFL players wanting to go back to grass, and then looking at the studies that they're looking at and realizing that these are peak human physical condition people doing ridiculous things. And yeah, at those tolerances, there might be some more soft tissue injuries, but at high school athlete tolerances, it seems from the studies I've seen at least that follow exactly what your daughter was saying, that turf is at least as safe as grass.
Hi, I'm Terry Swanson, and Langley, Washington, and I'm the high school girls soccer coach. Prior to that, I'd coached for 20 years with the South Woodby Youth Soccer Club. So I was here from the time before the Parks and Rec fields were constructed. We were involved with raising money to get that bond passed and put in all that drainage. And I can say for all those years I coached, those fields were always shut down in the wintertime when we were playing year-round soccer and with competitive leagues. And so it is nice to play on grass as a soccer player. It's great to play on grass, but the practicality of this is, you know, the usefulness, and we're trying to put in a facility, right, that we can use year round. We're going to be investing a lot in this, and the field as it is, I'm not saying it's unusable, but clearly it's not the best conditions for playing soccer because of the crown and you know, all the other things that Logan had addressed. The bond, as it was written and what we read as voters, was it was my understanding that's what we were voting for as part of that bond. And I understand that we need to have this discussion out there, but as a soccer coach and you know, someone who advocates for children, I really feel strongly that in the best interest of the community and best interest of the children, and I'm glad you did bring up those studies about injuries. The turf when I played was astrograss and concrete underneath, and there were injuries on the scenes. That it's improved immensely, and yes, it's as safe, or in some cases may be even safer than grass. So I strongly encourage the board to support putting in the synthetic turf and you know, trying to balance the environmental side, try to find a product that you guys are comfortable with. But I think at least that should be a starting point for that, and your investment would be worthwhile. And thank you.
I'm Natasha from Langley, and I just wanted to point out the use for the field is for students and athletes. Right now, athletes are getting hurt because the maintenance has not been done and it's not being taken care of. We see it all the time. I have 3 kids in the school, and the use for the school has changed. I mean, we have 2 campuses here. We have lots more kids at the high school using the field, and they need to use it for PE and all of the sports. So having another grass field put in is really not even an option, because it has to take at least a year for it to establish itself, and kids need to use it now. Like, they really do. They need to use it every single day. And I just don't see having grass as being beneficial to anyone at this point in time, because we don't have a year to wait for them to, you know, for it to get established, and for when it's rainy, you can't use grass. When it, you know, I mean, there's all these different things that happen during different parts of the year, and it needs to be used every day. I just want you guys to take that into consideration, because I feel it's very important that we have turf put in.
Thank you. Yeah. One thing that I'm always trying to balance is the immediate service to students who are in school now, particularly those who are in their like junior or senior year and might not see the benefit of a longer term project, with finding the best solution. And it seems to me like in this case, those two align. But it is definitely something I try to keep in mind when we're making decisions here. So thank you for addressing that.
The 1 year wait time, the 1 year wait time kind of makes me really resistant to this, because as the field serves sports a lot, but that also includes like home games, and then you're taking away soccer home games, football home games, which is like a huge core essential part of the high school like social and cultural, just like high school life. You know, I think that would be really detrimental to lose those abilities for a whole year. Would be rough.
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely see that perspective. Thank you. I also just wanted to mention the replacement cost of the turf versus the maintenance cost of the personnel. And I'm thinking, I see it as kind of an apples and apples comparison, in the sense that, you know, paying a salary every year for 10 or 15 years could easily roll into paying a $800,000 lump sum once. And yet I imagine those come from different funding pools, you know, so, you know, capital projects versus gen ed. And so I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the financial implications of that 15-year replacement cycle.
Yeah, the funding for an individual to maintain that field would come out of the general fund. It wouldn't be capital eligible to maintain. Maintenance is a responsibility of the general fund. We already know our MSOX cost doesn't cover our utilities and insurance, so we're going to have to take that from somewhere else. So that oncurring cost would fall onto the general fund.
And the field resurface, again, knowing that you have to do it in 15 years in dollars that are 15 years from now, taking money from capital and putting it aside. We've done that before for things.
So if we got a turf field, I would suggest we would take $75,000 or $100,000 a year out of our capital levy and put it aside. Pop Keeney Stadium in downtown Bothell was replaced 2 years ago at a cost of $630,000, and that was just the carpet for the top. So that is, in today's dollars, what it costs to resurface the field.
And those sound like big scary numbers, but could you put that in terms of like as a percentage of our budget, or you know, how does that kind of number, setting aside 75 grand out of the capital project budget, feel? Does that feel like a sustainable annual commitment?
Yeah, I believe so. We're like $2.5 million of our maintenance capital levy. So it would be doable, and it would just be our target for how long it would have to be. We would get that $2.5 million every year. So if we got into a pinch and we needed to do it right away, we would just have to hold other levy we would make it a levy priority in the year of that collection. And that's what we would do in October or April when we got the collection. However, I would push that we just set it aside so it's not such a pinch at one time, and Scott's plan to deliver the levy doesn't get derailed because we have to do a field in October.
Sure, thank you.
That sounds like everyone who's wanted to chime in has chimed in. Really appreciate folks. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Tracy Schnoberg, and I just wanted to mention that I know the stadiums are okay, but the restrooms are not. They need to be addressed.
We've got
I
a
just
plan.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Yeah, so a stadium renovation, restrooms in the second priority of the bond, and we're working towards it now, designing it. We're still reconciling our costs, but it's on our scope. I can't promise it to you right now that it's going to happen, but it is right on that priority list. So.
We can't promise that what we're hoping for, which is a restroom ticket booth kind of setup, will be implemented. But what we can promise is there will be renovation. We know very clearly, for example, when we have a track or cross-country meet, that we have to bring in portable toilets and they get crowded. So we know we need more. And there are actually formulas for that. The architects and engineers are working with us on what the plan could be and whether or not it's affordable this way or that way. They will be addressed.
Yeah, so the reason I'm hedging is because of the restroom count in the building. So we're working on, part of the bond is to do restrooms on the inside of the building to make them ADA compliant. And if we start adding restrooms, which right now it appears it'll be break even, but as soon as we start adding restrooms, it becomes a surface water and septic tank issue. So we're measuring those right now. We're still penciling all that stuff out. I'm very, very hopeful that we will get to this addition to the stadium that we have in the plan. But that's why I'm just hedging right now, because we're still in the middle of reconciling the costing. So.
It's fixed. Go ahead, Scott.
We've been working on it because we just had to get some parts. The toilets are very old in there. We had to order several parts and take the toilets apart and then redo sections of the toilets. And so they are now working again, and we're scoping out the drains in there and such and continuing to work on that. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. We've been trying to work through that and get what we needed in order to fix them.
Okay. So last pitch, follow along on either coming to the meetings or certainly on our website with the planning around the bond. We are currently working with architects, engineers, and our general contractor, Absher, to get things costed out and prioritized. And our first priority is the roof and the siding at the high school and the courtyard. Then we'll be working on the vestibule, the field, the grandstand, the press box, the toilets. There are a lot of things on the list that we're hoping we can get parking, reconfiguring parking lots, HVAC, all of the things. So it's all on our website and it's listed there. So yeah, wow, a lot of hands just went up. So
Yeah, okay. Last week, I just want to follow up. The best estimate was that perhaps if things go after this vote, that perhaps the field could be ready by the fall of 2026. Is that something that?
that's still in the plan. Yes, it is. And when again, you heard it last week, the expectation would be we'd start as soon as possible in the spring because it's as soon as soccer ended in the spring, they would start and hope to have it ready for football. So that is the plan. The best we can get that to happen.
So they
I
can do
personally think that is a zealous plan to get in there after soccer. So it may be that they relocate soccer that spring so that they can get in sooner and so on, but yet to be determined.
Thank you.
They can typically do a field in a summer if we have our permitting. The problem is they treat either one of these fields as if it was a cement parking lot. So it addresses all of our surface water management. And as soon as we start tweaking the circulation to the school with the lighting and the parking stalls, it all becomes this big formula of how are we going to maintain the water. Permitting in Island County takes time. If we're ready to go and shovel ready when school gets out in June, they should be able to knock the field out in a summer if it's all scheduled up. But right now we don't have our permit set blessed. So again, I'm hedging just because we're working through the plan. Like we're in the midst of getting this plan dialed in and permitted.
Right. And a piece of that is the board's decision next week. And then in 2 weeks, I mean. So yeah, all of this is going to take time. I really hate putting a time frame on individual projects, but the hope is that by 27, all of our projects are done for this bond. But again, it depends on a variety of things. You know, I was talking to a field installer for artificial turf. They're a company that could serve our area, had a field install artificial turf in Sitka, Alaska, and all it did was rain, 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 and it put the project off 6 months. So, you know, again, just saying, things happen.
I would just like to touch base on, you mentioned locker rooms. I just wanted to say that the girls and boys locker rooms right now don't have running water. I know the girls locker room, the sinks have not worked for the past few weeks. And
If you wouldn't mind, would you take that up with Mr. Peacock immediately after this meeting?
Okay.
So you can have a direct conversation with the person who can fix that problem?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can vouch. The boys don't either.
Yeah. So that's something we can deal with directly with the people who can get it fixed if it isn't already underway right now. Thank you. Anything else on the field surface?
When we break ground, can we do a groundbreaking ceremony with a golden shovel? Not
will.
fake gold, of course.
It will, and I don't want to go off topic, but we're going to do a grand reopening of that gymnasium because it's looking pretty good.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
if we get the golden shovel for the field reopening, can we have big scissors when we open the new courtyard?
So,
All of it.
Yeah.
You can have all of it. Big party, big plaque for you guys with your names on it. There you go.
I just want to be able to celebrate with the students in the community when the bond that they voted on
Yes.
starts to actually take shape.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, the most public thing is going to be the field, but the roof and siding are going to be really magnificent as well, just to enclose that building. But we digress.
okay, we will move on from the field service now. Thank you all for your comments and for joining in on the conversation. We will have a vote on it in 2 weeks at our business meeting. I am going to suggest that I'm going to talk it over with the board right now, suggesting that we have based on what I've been hearing here, have the memorandum suggest field turf with cork or similar infill and leave the rest of the details to the professionals? Or would folks prefer to have a voice vote on the two options at the business meeting.
If you wouldn't mind, can you let us get some counsel on what the resolution actually needs to look like? Is that all right?
Yeah.
And then I think what I'm hearing is put field turf on there and then the board will go yay or nay.
Well, that's what I'm asking. If we want to have it be field turf on there, yay or nay, or voice vote of sand, grass versus
Brooke, I just caught it, the term field turf. Field turf is a brand of
Sorry.
synthetic turf.
Synthetic turf.
So you don't want
Yes.
to put,
yes.
because that would lay claim like we're going to install field
Yes.
turf, which is a branded
No,
product.
perfect. Yes.
I would suggest that the administration can work to draft a resolution that implies a vote on a product that feels like the current leaning, which is something that's a synthetic turf with a as environmentally and healthfully friendly option as possible as underlayment, and that I would be very happy with an opportunity to vote yea or nay on that question, but that the wording would be left up to the administration.
Perfect.
Yeah, ditto. I was going to suggest something like that as opposed to a particular infill material to provide requirements or guidance on the material.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's the question I was looking for, whether we want a yay or nay resolution or a voice vote of between two options. So there we go. We can now move on from field surface to the levies. I will once again turn it over to Dr. Moshe.
So this is the board's opportunity for discussion on the two levies that are on the ballot in November. And we have one on the ballot for capital, which is $2.5 million a year for 6 years. And then the EP&O levy, which is about $3.5 million a year for 3 years. They've both, as you know, the board voted on them to put them on the ballot. They are on the ballot. This board and past boards have taken the opportunity to determine whether or not they wish to support the levies publicly. And so the boards are allowed to do that. And that vote comes up in 2 weeks if you choose to do it. And tonight's the board's opportunity to discuss that opportunity to put that on the ballot.
Or not to put it on the ballot, but
I
to
mean,
support it.
To put it on the
Yeah,
agenda.
to vote next meeting on whether or not to publicly support the levies.
Yeah, and again, for audience members, boards can't take a position unless they do a resolution to take a position to support or not support. You can't, as individuals, you can say what you like, but as a board, you can't say,
The
please
board
vote
supports this.
X.
Yeah.
Right, unless you vote on it.
I would just like to share that, as a private citizen and a parent in this district and an alum of this district, I am so grateful to our community for supporting the schools through these levies. I think that they're essential, and I think that it would be extremely hard to provide a public education, even at the bare minimum, without this community support. So I'm very sorry that the federal and state models don't adequately fund public education, but I'm very grateful that local support fills in where the state doesn't. So personally, I'm a big supporter of these levies. I hope that they pass resoundingly for our students and community. And if our board has an opportunity to vote on it, I'll bring that perspective with me as I vote.
+1.
Yeah, also +1. And just to unpack a little of that, I was actually really surprised at how many things the levy pays for that I would, or a layperson may assume would be covered, such as transportation, nutrition, substitutes, coaches.
Days off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Days off.
Sick days.
Sick days.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah,
Yes.
right. Sick day. Right. Sick days. So this may seem like a nice to have, but actually these funds seem extremely critical to the functioning of the district.
Our educators. Yeah. Just a ton of things in here, plus all the maintenance with the capital improvements and technology. So we don't want to forget
It literally
that.
pays to keep the lights on because, as you know, the state does not provide adequate funding for MSOCs, which is
Materials, supplies, and other costs.
excellent, including insurance, utilities, all of those things. And they have only raised that by a little over 1% when the cost of living has gone up 3.7%. And so we know this. Without that, we literally can't keep the lights on. Or to keep the lights on, we'd have to do away with other programs. $3.5 million worth of programs out of a $20 million budget. So you can imagine how significant that would be.
And just another note for those watching it from home that these are replacing expiring levies. These are not additional taxes
That's correct.
above what you're currently paying. Any other commentary, discussion on the levies?
I would like to make one other comment because I want to share a little bit of frustration with the voters pamphlet because for the third time, 3 votes, the school district has errors in there that are not ours. And this particular voters pamphlet on page 82 lists the Park and Rec explanation for the school district's ballot. So again, they are 3 for 3 for making errors on the school district's voters pamphlet. So it's a little frustrating.
And they're making a correction on this one.
They are, and they've also
Yeah.
notified the local newspaper so that they make a correction, but it's just frustrating because we checked and double checked that they had our information, that it was in on time, that they had received the pro and con statement, and we were reassured more than once. So it's just frustrating that we're 3 for 3 with errors.
I share your frustration. I'm really glad you've flagged the issue. It is an issue even if they issue a correction because there are voters who are going to recycle anything that looks like a piece of junk mail, but keep this physical voters pamphlet that they expect year after year. And I know I'm one who will keep the pamphlet and turn to it as I pull out my ballot. And I may not keep another slip of paper that may arrive as a correction in my mailbox. So it has an impact for voters who prefer to read physical rather than online mail, for voters who don't have internet access at home, for voters who don't get the memo about the correction or who don't see that slip of paper in their mailbox a couple weeks later. It feels to me like there should be some more accountability for holding this really important democratic process with greater care at the level of the auditor. Is it the auditor's office that manages this? Yeah, I hope that they can take this to heart and think about their practices and systems so that they can stop making these errors.
Say it again.
Version is on.
Their online version has been corrected, is what Christy is sharing.
Anything else on the levies? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to our policy review. Begins with,
You've got a
Oh,
comment
just a
from
moment, we have a comment.
folks sitting.
Hi, I'm Natasha again. So about the levies, when was the last one passed?
The last,
I was just curious
yeah.
because I don't remember.
so the last capital improvements and technology levy was passed 6 years ago, and the
Mhm.
last EP&O, educational programs and operations, was 3 years ago.
That's a long time.
Yeah. So, and they run 6 years and 3 years respectively. So they're at the end of their timeline, and the expectation, the hope is rather that the community can keep supporting them as they come up. As they end, they can support it again. Because as you heard, the school district absolutely depends on those funds.
And a comment about the voters pamphlet. We actually, they never even send us one, so it's kind of weird. I don't know. How many?
You can have one as long as you're willing to take page 82 with a grain of salt.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to our policy review. Our first thing is update to South Bay School District Policy 6890, State Environmental Policy Act compliance.
Yep.
Director Downs.
Basically, in this policy, we're just thinning out quite a bit of language referencing to a specific state environmental policy act in the WAC. And there are some shalls to wills that you all can decide if you want to keep or shift, but otherwise it's just eliminating redundancy.
Yeah, and the other part of it is in here, there's the language about when you identified me as our SEPA consultant, that language is still exactly the same. That's why I brought that last month or last board meeting, because the language is, that part of the language is the same. And like Director Downs is saying, this is just cleaning up a bunch of redundancies and rolling it up into the RCW as one line instead of 17.
One thing I did notice is that there's a he/she in 2 paragraphs on bottom of page 6 and top of page 7 in designation of official to perform consulted agency responsibilities for the district in that third to last line of the 2nd paragraph. And then under designation of responsible official, the first line of the next page.
See that, Christy? You just
Yeah,
passed
right
it.
there.
Superintendent or their designee,
Yeah.
it should be.
Just as part of our ongoing language cleanup. That was the only thing I noticed. I leave the actual legal definitions to the professionals on that and make sure that our policy.
Oh, it even
lead
says
thinks it
his
works.
designee. Wow. This is,
Oh yeah, there's another one there. Yep.
that's really old. Okay.
So this is one of those cases where once we get those updates, this is one of those things where we can pass them back up to WASDA for those 3
Mhm.
changes also.
Yes.
And I think that's on me. So once we have it completed, I will talk to their policy folks.
There's another he, she in that paragraph. 2nd paragraph of the
Yeah.
designation. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, right, just to the left of, yep. That was the one that caught my eye first,
Ah.
but yeah, there's one above that's just he, and then there's a
And
he,
there's
she at the
another
next
on
one.
the first
Yep.
passage of the next page.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks. Great.
That's those 3.
Do a find replace on Christy. I know.
no,
I
no.
know.
Any other questions, comments on this one? Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is update to South Whitby School District Policy 2000, student learning goals. This one and the next one are just coming up in our regular cycling through of updating language. This one, for instance, in its last paragraph has just parents, and it should be parents/guardians. Just to be more inclusive of other families that may not, where a student may be living with another family member or someone who is not a blood relation or something like that.
Stop me if this opens up a can of worms or this isn't the appropriate policy for something like this, but I noticed all these learning goals are academic, and there's nothing about quote unquote soft skills, teaching our students to collaborate with each other, to have leadership, regulate their emotions. I'm not sure if it would be the appropriate place for this or if that's already covered in a different policy.
That wasn't my intention bringing up this policy, but it's certainly valid.
This would be the appropriate
yeah.
policy.
Yeah, this would be the right place for that.
What you just articulated would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm glad this is being recorded because if we can just go back and capture that sentence and add it as a couple E, F, and G, that sounds great. I would support expanding this policy to include the other capacities that Director Green-Heron has named.
Can also procedurally, the goals you set annually drive what we do for our school improvement plans. So that could be, that the board will set goals for the superintendent on an annual basis, and they will drive the instructional program, something to that effect.
Yeah, I think we could look at some of the restorative language we already have available to us. I like the language around soft skills, but being kind of implicit in what that might look like in terms of goals, I think would be valuable for this policy.
Joe, I know that you're going to be at tomorrow's leadership meeting. Maybe we can set up a time to tweak this before the next meeting.
Certainly.
Excellent. Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to, and just in case folks in the audience are curious, this is still part of the workshop. This is, it is still our meeting together. If you have viewpoints on these also, you're welcome to chime in. The last one on our list is update to South Whidbey School District Policy 3123, withdrawal prior to graduation admittance and attendance. This one we've actually touched once, but missed a couple last year. There's a he or she in the second to last paragraph, and a parents that should be parents or guardians in point C.
I would like to suggest a change of the line that refers to students as potential dropouts and suggest that we instead refer to them as students at risk of dropping out.
I love that. Yes. I think that's fantastic to not identify them by a single issue as we do with students experiencing homelessness or anything else. I think that's fantastic.
And an opportunity to reference guardians in line C,
Yeah.
student and
Yep.
their guardians.
Yep.
Um,
Bless you. Yeah, there's a couple of places in C where it's just parent and it should be parent or guardian. Yeah. And then, like I said, he and she, or he or she in the second to last paragraph.
I also wonder about students age 18 or older who are legally emancipated and whether there's enough room in this language for that student to feel represented. Student and or guardians as opposed to student and guardians.
I think we have to be careful with that because if they are not emancipated, the guardian still has to be included.
Right, fair enough. I would defer to our policy expert to let me know if there's a way to make this policy more inclusive without weakening its strength.
So it does say, so what I believe we're going to change it to shift to read would be no student under the age of 18 will be permitted to withdraw unless they are lawfully and regularly employed and either a parent or guardian agrees that the student should not be required to attend school or the student has been emancipated in accordance with Chapter 13. I can't think of any other reason why a student would withdraw.
Well, I think that's
Over-
covered. I think Marnie was, or Director Jackson was referencing C, where
I
it
would-
just says student available to the student and their parents.
I was just thinking about if a student who is 18 and does have a choice for themselves about withdrawal, if they read line C, would they feel represented?
I think because they're explicitly called out below,
fair.
because at that point they wouldn't have a parent or a guardian.
Yep, that's fine. I can live with that.
So I would read it as it's whoever's appropriate in that conversation, and they are explicitly called out that they could, if they are over 18 and or emancipated, that they can choose to withdraw themselves.
Very good. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Good night. This meeting is adjourned.